Hello, everybody, and welcome to Life TV Now, where we unpack all matters of truth, faith, and freedom. I'm your host, Joe Artis Horn. Today, we're going to be doing something a little bit different. If you recall the pilot episode of this program, I said there would be days where we would go out into the field, perhaps showcase something our family is doing, maybe invite you into our homes at a holiday, or maybe film something from outside of the studio that might be pertinent to your health. And I want to tell you at the onset, one of the videos that I recently sat down and recorded in my home was a response to so many emails, so many texts, messages from friends, other people in ministry that had heard something about Joe Horn using a nebulizer for something like a bronchitis or a seasonal allergy to avoid maybe it becoming something worse like pneumonia. What is this thing called a nebulizer? Where do you get one? How do I use it? So I sat down and I recorded a 22-minute video that explains all of the answers to those questions through the lens of what my family does with them personally. But before I show you this, I want to tell you, in the video, you'll see me make a mention of some of the testimonies that I didn't have time in that video to reveal. When we come back from the nebulizer video, I'm going to be talking with you for just a few minutes about some of the testimonies that I've experienced or heard from people who took my advice on how to use a nebulizer and the results that they got when they were headed for some pretty malevolent things related to pneumonia/bronchitis. But before we watch the video, show of hands, how many of you have ever struggled with a seasonal allergy, had a sinus infection, had a cough that you struggled to shake, or just had a standard case of the sniffles linger for 2 weeks and you're like, what is this? And every hand in the building just went up. That's why we did the video. Ladies and gentlemen, I know this is a little bit of a departure from doing a program here exclusively in the studio, but I feel like this information could be valuable to you and your family. Watch this. Hey everybody, it's Joe Artis Horn. Today I'm doing something that I feel is way overdue. This is probably one of the most requested videos that I continue to get. People want to know, with cold and flu season right around the corner, how do they use this little thing called a nebulizer? What do you nebulize and what is it good for? Well, one of the things that my family uses a nebulizer for, and in just a minute I'm going to show you what it is to get ahead of anything that might start off in our sinuses that wants to feel like it's traveling down into our lungs. I'm talking about getting ahead of things like bronchitis, and of course, in doing so, also getting ahead of things like pneumonia before these things turn highly bacterial and want to take you to places like the hospital. So first, what is a nebulizer? A nebulizer is a small device that turns liquid medicine into fine mist. So kids with asthma use these, kids with COPD, which is chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. Some people will use them for things like cystic fibrosis, severe allergies, or respiratory infections. And basically how they work is this here is a compressor, and some of them use ultrasonic vibrations or a mesh system to turn the liquid medicine that is placed in the small canister into a mist. And then the idea is that you use the mask, or some of them will come with a small mouthpiece. These fit either into the mouth or over the nose, and then you breathe in this medicine. So what does the Horn family put in a nebulizer? Well, before I answer that, I just want to say that I'm not diagnosing or prescribing anybody that might happen upon this video with anything specific. What I tend to do is based on floors and ceilings, a threshold based on my own personal family. So this involves my children, my siblings, my friends, extended friends, and somebody that I might be coaching behind the scenes that understands that they also have maybe a series of medications that they might be on that may not get along with some of the supplements if taken at that ceiling threshold. So find a practitioner of choice if you have any questions about any of the amounts that I'm talking about today, and ask them if what we're doing works for you. So up first, colloidal silver. Now this is something you can get at Eden's Essentials, and this one in particular is 15 parts per million, which I really prefer when used in a nebulizer. Colloidal silver has been shown over and over again to have high antimicrobial and high antibacterial effects, which I personally feel pairs very well with this next component to what our family uses when nebulizing, and that is Eden's Salt of the Earth. Now, what does salt do for the lungs? Well, it hydrates irritated airways. It can improve airflow, and it has a supportive therapy often used alongside prescribed treatments or something that your practitioner of choice might be also utilizing to help you overcome something like anything from the common cold to bronchitis on its way, or, again, trying to get ahead of something like pneumonia, which is almost always a guaranteed side effect of laying around, not getting movement, not using your lungs, not expanding those giant lymphatic tissues and surfaces. And then bacteria begins to build in the lungs. And of course, from there, you start running the fevers and you get sicker and sicker and sicker. And at that point, you usually end up at the hospital on some kind of a high potency antibacterial antibiotic drip. And so again, we want to be using the lungs, breathing. I'm going to show you that in just a second. The other thing that's really important to mention about the colloidal silver is that it is based in sterilized distilled water. So you do not want to add tap water or well water to a nebulizer and then be breathing that, because we have no way of knowing what might be in that water. So it's important to use sterile, usually medical grade or distilled water or something like this as your base. Now let me show you how you load the nebulizer. Now, when my family is depending on a nebulizer to help clear out any potential illness that might be wanting to settle into the sinuses or the airways, I will load just about 25% of this total canister. So if you go above, I don't know if you can see this, but there's a little nipple in the middle right there. That is open to allow little bits of air to work with the compressor to create the mist. And if you fill this all the way up to the top, it'll just puke and gurgle. This also tends to be about 20 to 25 minutes of product. So if you load it up to about there, you can use this same amount. You can use half now and then half some other time during the day if you're only doing this twice a day for about 10 to 12 minutes. And if we are concerned about things, we will do this up to 3 times a day. So we're going to use, let's say in the morning, half of this product, and then in the afternoon, the other half, and then load it again, and then use half of that product at evening time or post dinner. Now, if that's all too complicated, what we do is basically 10 to 15 minutes, 3 times a day. Sometimes we'll do 20 minutes if we really, really, really need maximum penetration or impact. Then on the salt, we're going to use just a pinch. Now, I use this little tiny spoon out of another supplement, and I just keep this on hand, but I do not fill this all the way to the top. So filling just the corner, when it levels out, it ends up being basically about a pinch. So if I were to stick my fingertips into a bowl of this salt, I'm only going to get about a pinch, okay? So I'm going to add that to the canister, and you'll see this dissolve right away. Give a little swirl, and then we're going to reassemble the nebulizer. Now, they're all a little bit different, and by the way, you can get these at Amazon for anywhere between $40 and about $69. I am not getting a kickback from this company, but we use the Sierra Neb 2. Again, I am not affiliated with these people. I don't get a kickback for this. We're not in business together. They don't know who I am. There's a variety of these on Amazon, and you can just find one that fits your budget. Most of them will accomplish about the same type of thing. Then we're going to reassemble the canister. So if this looks a little different from the one you end up purchasing, it will work fundamentally nearly the same, I'm pretty sure. So the top of the canister goes back on this way, and you'll feel this little click when you go clockwise so that it's nice and sealed. This portion plugs into said mask or mouthpiece. I prefer the mask because it's going to cover the nose. And getting the silver up into the sinuses, in my view, along with the salt, which will help moisten, lubricate, is very important if you feel this head pressure and you really need to get the gunk out, okay? But if you hate the experience of the salt and you prefer the mouthpiece, you can go that route. I prefer the full face mask. Now, at the end of the compressor, you'll see a little air hose that plugs into the bottom of the canister. Very, very simple to put these together, okay? Most of them don't come with complicated dials or clocks for counting down a specific 15-minute timer. There are some more expensive ones that come with all kinds of features. I like the ones that have an on and an off button. Very simple. So as soon as I turn this on, you'll see the product that we've put in begin to mist. So there it is, you see? So we are now misting salt and colloidal silver, and you can see my product has turned kind of a milky color. That is the compressor working to create the mist. Every one of these masks will have holes probably very similar to this. This is where your oxygen is coming in, and then when you exhale, where all of that goes, so that you're not being suffocated. A lot of people are wondering, when I plug my face behind a mask, am I able to breathe? The answer is very much yes. Now, I'm going to do resting breaths that are basically like the ones that I would draw and exhale watching a television program or reading a book, okay? So just normal breathing in through the nose and out through the mouth. This allows the product to get into my sinuses and provide the benefit that we've been discussing. So mask over face, this behind the head, in through the nose, out through the mouth. Now, about every 30 to 40 seconds, this is the way I do it. If somebody in my family is struggling to keep up with this, or they feel like they're really laboring to breathe, or they feel like this is too excitable for them, or they're running a fever, or they're not feeling well, I will say, well, then do it as often as you feel like you can. But basically what I do is I'll take a very quick breath that's almost like I'm being startled by a grizzly bear at the door. So what do I mean by that? Resting breaths in through the nose, out through the mouth. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Every 40 to 60 seconds, I'll take one of these very fast intakes of air, like I'm being startled by a grizzly bear at the door. And the reason I'm doing that is because I want to quickly get the product into my body. Very quickly. A lot of these lazier breaths, while helpful to the sinuses, they may not reach the lungs the way I want it to reach the lungs. And so I will, like I'm startled for a moment, and I'll do that about every 30 to 40, maybe 60 seconds. And if I feel like I'm beginning to aspirate, then obviously I'm doing it way too often. So now that I've explained that, I'm going to show you what that looks like so that you can see it without all the commentary, since my face won't be hiding behind the mask. You'll know what I'm up to. So turn the nebulizer on. And then, of course, I'll add 10 to 15, sometimes 20 minutes more of that. And I also forgot to mention earlier that you can, when you do that very fast breath in, you can hold that for a couple of seconds so that you really allow your lymphatic systems to be stretched, the product to hit the surfaces inside your body. And the other thing is, everybody knows when you do something like battle bronchitis or eventually pneumonia, when you go into the hospital, what's one of the first things that they have you do? They want you to take deep breaths. They'll often even offer you a medical device that is designed to test your ability to blow with force or to breathe in with force, to get kind of a measurement of your total intake of oxygen and then your total exhale. So you're moving your lungs. That is so important. I've had people tell me that just getting up and mowing the lawn and exerting their lungs just a little bit did way more for them in fighting some of these things than lying around on the couch. But again, talk to your practitioner of choice about a plan that works specifically for you. Again, I am sharing what we do as a family. Now let's talk about some supplement supports. If we feel like we need to bring in some serious cavalry to the situation, we need immediate and effective support. Let's talk about some supplements. Okay, so these are not in any particular order from, like, let's say, greatest importance to the least of importance. These are all actually very important. And I find the way I do things with my children and my family members, I tend to start incorporating combinations of all of them basically at the same time if I feel like there's any possibility that this isn't just a standard daytime case of the sniffles. First up, we're going to talk about fenugreek very briefly. This is a go-to that I have used for a long time with my family. I've got friends that have taken this at my suggestion for things like sinus infections who have said, quote, "Joe, I will never be without fenugreek ever again. It completely changed how I do the sinus season," unquote. So briefly, just a very quick bullet point of some of the benefits of fenugreek. This is going to do a lot to loosen mucus, almost unrivaled in its ability to help loosen mucus, whether it's stuck in your eustachian tube and you're dealing with an ear infection, or whether you've just got that head pounding pressure that builds with the swollen eyes and you're blowing your nose all day. It's going to do a lot to calm bronchial swelling, chest tightness. It moistens dry lungs. It's traditionally used for, hacking and coughing spells. It is one of my favorite herbs that's been used since the dawn of time for things like chest heaviness or that feeling of foreboding doom. You're losing the battle with whatever this thing is. It loosens and it helps clear up all of the mucus body wide. The next one I want to talk about very briefly is one called N-acetylcysteine, or more popularly referred to as NAC, because it's easier to remember. But N-acetylcysteine, and of course the one that we have here at Eden's Essentials, also has bromelain enzymes and something called quercetin. And you can read all day long about the benefits of those two things. I use them for anything respiratory, cough, sinus, because of what it can do to help reduce swelling. It can calm immune overreaction, which stabilizes irritated airways and supports normal breathing. A lot of naturopathic doctors actually use N-acetylcysteine and things like bromelain and quercetin to help people overcome seasonal allergies, which a lot of times is where a lot of these bacterial infections develop. It actually starts off as a seasonal allergy, and then it can't clear the system, and so bacteria then begins to breed and then replicate. Up next, very briefly, we have one of the ones that I consider to be an absolute titan of what we're talking about today, and that is mullein. Mullein is probably one of God's most powerful herbal supports for loosening mucus. It helps break up thick phlegm so it can be coughed out more easily. It soothes irritated airways. It coats inflamed bronchial tissues and reduces coughing spasms. And it is highly antimicrobial. So when you add this to what we're discussing today, this whole methodology for clearing the lungs, getting stuff out of the sinuses, helping the lungs prevail over bacteria, this is probably one of the absolute go-tos. There are people that will just use this to help clear some of the stuff that we're talking about today. And finally, last but certainly not least, again, one of time's most powerful herbs, thyme. This is one of the most powerful herbs that my family relies on to help us combat respiratory infections. We're talking about organisms, things that are antimicrobial in nature. And it also helps break up mucus and makes coughing more productive. It can aid in relaxing airways. This stuff really dislikes infection. And that's probably all I will say in this video about that one. My family uses this one a lot for a lot of things, but I absolutely love thyme. Now you're probably wondering, okay, Joe, you've compelled me. I'm interested in all of these things, but you did not talk amounts. You did not talk dosing. Well, again, I have to be very careful that I'm not prescribing or dosing anyone out there that might be watching this video that may have any number of medications they're interacting with, any number of protocols that doctors have already placed them on. So again, I'm just sharing what my family does. So I'll tell you what we do. So we're going to go through these pretty rapid fire. Now, I already showed you how we use the colloidal silver and the salt when using a nebulizer. On the fenugreek for my children, let's say ages 12 or younger, depending on the severity of what I'm dealing with, I might offer them one of these 3 times a day, or I may offer a ceiling of, let's say, 2 of these 3 times a day. And then with my teenagers, I tend to deal with them more like I would if it were me. And for the adults in our family, when it comes to fenugreek, we will either follow, depending on the severity of what we're dealing with, what we've offered the children, or we may raise that ceiling up to 3 capsules 3 times a day to really get that mucus out. Now we move on to the NAC, the N-acetylcysteine, with bromelain enzymes and quercetin. And again, depending on the severity of what we're dealing with, if I have somebody in my family that's 12 years of age or younger, I might do 2 of these capsules twice a day. If I feel like it's becoming more severe, I would maybe bump that up to 2 capsules 3 times a day, being kind of the ceiling. And as for the adults in our family, when it comes to the NAC, we will either follow what we've offered the children, or we might raise that ceiling up to 3 capsules 3 times a day for a limited number of days while we overcome something maybe more severe. And that just leaves the 2 herbal liquid tinctures that I mentioned moments ago, the thyme and the mullein. And I am going to show you how we do this. Now, if you read the bottle, you will see that it is suggested that a serving size is 30 drops. There's an easier way that we've found to do this. You can count out the 30 drops, or what I do, which is very close to 30 drops, is you squeeze the cap over and over and over again until the liquid herb reaches the top of the dropper. Now, when you place this over the glass or the jar or the cup or whatever it is that you're putting the herb into, you just squeeze the top until your fingers barely touch. Now, if you squeeze and squeeze desperately, you may get closer to 36, 38 drops. But if you just squeeze the top until your fingertips barely touch, you will get nearly exactly 30 drops every time. And we do that with both of these liquid herbs. So again, I'm going to squeeze the top of the dropper over and over and over again until the liquid herb reaches the top. And then I'm going to squeeze until my fingertips barely touch. And that is going to be basically 30 drops, very, very close to 30 drops if you don't want to stand there and count 30 drops over and over and over again. Now, for the children in my family, 12 years of age or younger, you can add juice to this if they dislike the flavor. I highly suggest that you do that. Stay away from things with sugar, because that defeats a lot of the purpose behind why you're helping their immune system try to overcome something like we've been talking about today. So in a nutshell, that is an overview of how my family deals with basically anything that we feel is a cold, becoming something that wants to move to the chest. If the thought of bronchitis is even looming in the horizon, I will often personally, with my own family members, begin this whole method all at once and be doing that like I've been describing multiple times a day. This method has become a go-to for not only my family, but several of the families that we've shared some of this information with. The testimonials that I've gotten back from people that were rounding that very dangerous corner who immediately began to improve and recover has been nothing short of an answer to prayer. And maybe one of these days we'll tell more of those testimonial stories. But today I just wanted to introduce you to what a nebulizer is, how we use it, and some of the liquid tincture herbs and supplements that we use when confronting some of these seasonal flus, allergies, sinus infections, bronchitis, etc. You can get every one of the products that we talked about today at edensessentials.com. Thank you very much. Well, there you have it. I hope that you learned something about how our family uses a nebulizer. I do want to share some of the testimonies that we've received as a family, but before I do, I want to mention once again a medical disclaimer. This is not me giving you medical advice. If you're ever faced with a situation where your oxygen is dropping, your fever is spiking, and you need emergency care, you pray through your own determinations about what care to give yourself and to your family members. But before we run out of time, I do want to share some of the feedback from some of the people that have either seen the video or friends or personal family members of mine. One of my staff actually told me today that his son, Winchester, came down with RSV. And our family, of course, had helped them before. That's respiratory syncytial virus. It affects, kids in the lungs, and if not treated quickly, can advance into more nefarious outcomes. Because he had worked with our family before with how to use a nebulizer and how to use silver, he did essentially parts of what you saw just now in the video with the salt and the silver. And he said it was tremendous in allowing little Winchester to start recovering very quickly. Another very close friend of mine, Debbie, who lives in an assisted living facility, who is predisposed for things like bronchitis, pneumonia, was getting rapidly ill about a year ago. And they put a pulse ox on her finger. These people are very concerned about her. She's very resistant to want to go to the hospital. So I had her son swing by my house and take her a box of stuff, basically the things that you just saw in the video. And of course, in her case, she went to the maximum of what I just described in terms of self-care and had some help from the nurses that are there at the assisted living facility. And she called me a couple of days later and she said, Joe, I think that protocol saved my life because they were thinking pneumonia, and she is protesting. Again, be responsible. This is not me suggesting that you should watch a video like this and suddenly give self-care that you're not qualified to administer. I would say find a good practitioner that's in alignment with your goals. If you're an individual that likes to approach these things more naturally as opposed to allopathically. And finally, because we're almost out of time, one of my family members had a reoccurring eye infection that just continued and continued and continued and continued. About 8 to 9 months into this thing, she had been to her medical doctor. She had been spraying silver in her eye, which was good and probably keeping it at bay, but it would almost clear up and then come back, and almost clear up and come back, and so about a year ago, she starts getting very ill. And I can tell right away this is wanting to move into the chest. She is super convinced that maybe we can do something at home. So I told her, I said, come to our house. We'll do what we can to support you, and then we'll see if we need something outside of this approach. So she begins some of the methods that you just watched in the nebulized video as a prophylactic to try to mitigate anything that might want to settle into her lungs. So that begins to clear. But what happens as a total bonus and a side effect of this? Her eye clears up. And that's been a year ago. And at the time I told this family member, I said, you know what I think? I think that was an eye infection that actually started in your sinuses. And that's why the silver wants to fight it into what looks like remission, and then it wants to come back the minute you stop doing that. And I believe that the silver got into the sinuses and wiped this thing out. And that's been a year ago. It's a go-to that my family has enjoyed many, many benefits from, and I hope that you learned something today. Unfortunately, we're all out of time. For everybody here in studio, I'm Joe Artis Horn. Keep your eyes on the prize, which is Jesus Christ. We'll be back.